All right, guys. Welcome to tonight's podcast from Combat Ready Fire Training. Tonight we're live here on YouTube, and we're going to be having a show that we've kind of wanted to talk about for a while. The focus of tonight's episode is really going to be changes in rapid intervention or fast teams or whatever you call it in your area. But we're going to be talking about the evolution of rapid intervention in the fire service and some changes in mindset and changes in approach. And, I think that's going to kind of end up spanning all levels. I know I definitely have some command level things that we want to talk about there, but I'm pretty sure we'll also kind of dive into the company officer and the firefighter level stuff. So joining me on tonight's show, I'm joined tonight by Deputy Chief Floyd Wise from the Harrisburg Bureau of Fire in Pennsylvania, and Battalion Chief Chris Mullendore from Frederick County Fire Rescue in Maryland. If you've will listen to the show or watched this before, I'm sure you're no stranger to Chief Wise. But Chris is one of our new additions, and I think this is the first show where you're joining us here live on the YouTube. So welcome, Chris. I don't know if you want to kind of give a little bit of introduction or background about you and your department.
Yes, I'm from Frederick County, Maryland. It's a county-based fire and rescue system. It goes from very urban to very rural. We have just about everything, volunteer, heavy career. The only thing we don't have is high rises. We have a couple, I guess you'll call them low rises or mid rises. In Frederick County, I serve as a special ops battalion chief. Day work, kind of float, backfill some battalion chief spots here and there. That's my deal.
Floyd, Special Ops Battalion, that's right up your alley, huh, brother?
Yeah, we don't have that. I think we're like the jack of all trades, right? We do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, which is can be fun sometimes, right? And then, of course, Floyd and I just got back from the Bay Area Fire Nuggets Conference out there in Santa Rosa, California. A little jet lagged still. That was last weekend, but still a little jet lagged. But man, is that a beautiful area and a super cool conference. So shout out to anybody that we got to hang out with out in California. I mean, always a highly motivated group of firefighters, and really thankful to the group from Fire Nuggets for getting us the opportunity to come back out there. And if you haven't been to any of their shows, you should definitely look it up. The Fire Nuggets group is a really solid organization that really kind of helps put together conferences all over. I know I've been to ones in the Pacific Northwest outside of Seattle, there in California, and there's other groups all over the country. So check it out. There's probably something in your neck of the woods. But getting into stuff tonight, I mean, let's just kind of jump into it a little bit. Floyd, I thought I'd kind of start hearing out from you and Harrisburg, and just some high level background, like what and to my knowledge, because I think you would have told me, I don't think Harrisburg has had any real Mayday events or formal Mayday events anyway recently. But what is the thinking and approach there in Harrisburg to rapid intervention, Mayday management, that kind of stuff?
So I guess for our department, our rapid intervention is provided by an outside agency. We have Rescue 69, which is a federal fire department rescue company that comes into our city first alarm, and they're kind of the dedicated rapid intervention, right, on paper. Although they do get put to work frequently instead of rapid intervention, just because how firegrounds can be flexible. But they're kind of dedicated for that. Great group. They come with 5 staff career minimum, and then they prepare for that. In the area, we actually just recently kind of, I will say, created or engaged with a rapid intervention team, kind of a policy for the region to work inside of. So it's a little bit more thought out through how everybody works mutual aid. Our companies provide RIT. We are on box cards as a RIT unit when we go outside the city. Although again, just with arrival, our companies arrive so quickly because they're career staff that they don't always fall into the RIT category. They're usually put to work because they're a first or second arriving engineer special service. So they don't, even though they're called for RIT, they end up going to work.
Well, so there's two things you brought up there that I want to kind of talk about, and Chris, kind of see how you deal with them. The first is the mutual aid department as RIT, and I say that a little bit of a loaded question to both you guys because I think that it takes two different forms, right? Chris, there in Frederick County, the mutual aid environment is a very formalized thing, right? Compared to other places, like the relationship between Frederick and Howard and, Loudoun and Montgomery and the other bordering counties, that's a pretty interchangeable relationship, isn't it? Like, so for you, it would not be uncommon to have a mutual aid department being rapid intervention company in Frederick.
Yeah, so it can be interesting though. So Frederick County is surrounded by 8 different counties, 3 states, and we can go from a very urban, grown, established department that's going to come and do an excellent job being our rapid intervention, or we can go from some rural areas that they're not really SOG driven. They're coming in. You don't know what kind of training you're going to get with the people, and that's going to be your rapid intervention, at least initially. Past that, we give a rapid intervention dispatch. It's going to get you another engine, a special service, either a truck or a squad, a medic unit, an ambulance, EMS supervisor. So once we get bailed out, you have 2 engine companies and a special service. But initially, who knows who that could be?
And on that rapid intervention dispatch, so that's essentially what some departments might call the working fire upgrade. Is that kind of an equivalent to that?
Yeah, that's right. So our initial box gets you 5 engine companies, a squad, a truck, and then either a special service, either truck or squad, as well as an ambulance, a medic unit, 2 battalion chiefs. So we try to kill it right from the start. And then as soon as we get there and realize that we're going to have some kind of working fire, then we're adding that rapid intervention dispatch.
And the on the box, on the first alarm assignment, one of the companies, is it third due? Let me test my knowledge of Frederick County SOG.
So, one of those aspects, man, it used to be third due for us, then it bumped to fourth due, then it bumped to fifth due. So I think as the fire department has evolved, and just like studies, man, so there's studies in everything in the fire service now. It's all, if you want information on something, it's out there. So you got to give credit when it comes to rapid intervention to Don Abbott and everything he's done with Project Mayday. But that's taken us to where we're trying to make good decisions based off of research. So, Don Abbott tells you that the majority of the time rescues are made by working crews. And so it's made it where us as a department, we've bumped back the rapid intervention. Not that they're not still making rescues, because that's happening. But those initial companies, get them in work, get them in place, get them working. Let's make the situation better. And if they're in place, they're more likely to make the rescue.
That's very true. I have been all week long, Floyd. I came back from our California time, which was hectic, right? And I have been all 5 days since Monday in our Battalion Chief Academy class. So it's really our command officer class. It's the class that whatever your rank is, captain or fire chief, like whatever your rank is, it's the class you take to be certified to be a command officer on emergency incidents. And so all week long I've been doing that. And today we were doing Mayday management, and so I just have a lot of the stuff fresh in my head. And yeah, it's like, depending on what year you look at the data from, if you look at the Project Mayday stuff, even pre-Project Mayday, I had some data. I was looking up this earlier today. We were talking about in class. It was data from the FDNY for fires for Mayday incidents between 1989 and 2008. And really, within a couple of percentage points, all the data was kind of the same, right? Like the stuff that come up in Project Mayday about, order of help and who's likely to rescue a downed firefighter, that's really actually plus or minus a point consistent with what like places like, say, the FDNY, found 20 years ago. And, you're right, Chris. Like, it's like, shooting from the hip here. I don't have it in front of me, but it's approximately 88% of rescues are made by people that are in the building. The remaining 12% are, the rapid intervention company, or a, or a staged resource or something like that. So that's interesting. So Chris, you're saying that you guys kind of use some of that data to kind of bump the initial RIT responsibility back on the alarm assignment?
Yeah, so we use that in order to bump it back. And, as the fire service goes, I think that that data is going to help drive other things. Think about training as the rapid intervention, but off the initial engine company or the second engine company. Now, hey, you've been engaged in a firefight or you're doing search and there's a rapid intervention. How are you able to carry out both tasks depending on your crew size and how that affects your overall incident and the strategy that we're trying to go with. So while I don't know that everyone is there, I foresee that being the route people are going to start going as far as training and the mindset.
Yeah. So that brings up a couple things like Floyd. I mean, I know that you and I both look a lot at the, line of duty reports, whether they're internal reports or NIOSH level reports or whoever. And, it seems that historically, a lot of times, after a tragedy, the fire department, for lack of a better term, gets dinged for not having a rapid intervention team. And that comes out as like one of the contributing factors or recommendations that, hey, we should have an early RIT established. And I'm wondering and of course we can't speak to every case, right? So we can't say, because what I'm wondering is that just, are we just throwing that in there and it's not really a contributing factor? Because if the data is saying that, the majorities of the rescues are made by people that are inside of the building, and therefore we can kind of bump that RIT back in terms of initial assignments, but then something bad happens and we get our wrist slapped and say, no, you should have had it earlier. And again, we can't speak to every incident. So I'm sure that there's some that go to one side and some that go to the other side. But how are you thinking about that in your head?
Well, I mean, I think that's the change in philosophy in how kind of the thought of RIT has evolved. I look back to my training, when I kind of started around the mid 90s, rapid intervention was group of firefighters, highly trained, let's say like the Green Beret on the fire ground, and you were, to be ready at will to respond into the building and save the downed firefighter, right? That was I guess the methodology. And then now we have the data that says that's not at all what's happening. So I think the shift now is we understand the need for RIT, but I think we also understand that there's need for fireground functions that make the fireground safer prior, and thus RIT probably will not get used as frequently. So I asked the question to the group and whoever's on here and say, how do I develop a RIT, rapid intervention, for when I still have not addressed things like primary search and those functions where I'm trying to save life, right? Like, I'm not saying RIT is not important, but when I'm stressed out on just doing the fundamental fireground things that increase safety, how can I afford to have firefighters that are just outside, even if they're doing proactive things? And I just offer that as a question. And I think that's the thought process.
I think it's, I think it's definitely something places have to consider. I mean, I wouldn't go out there tomorrow and change your run cards or your alarm assignment, your SOG or whatever tomorrow. But I think it's definitely a conversation we need to have. Something I want to bring up before I forget about it is we're all kind of saying the same thing here, right? I mean, our experience and our data, I think kind of tells you that if we just paraphrase, that the RIT is statistically, statistically hands-on in the rescue of the downed firefighter less than 10% of the time. And that would sound like that should deprioritize RIT, or that would sound like we're talking trash about RIT. But that's not the case at all, because, Chris, unfortunately, you're very close to two line of duty deaths there in the Howard County, Frederick County area there, Josh Laird's incident and also Nathan Flynn's incident. And, I think there's some eerie similarities on multiple levels between both of those incidents. But as it relates to what we're talking about, to my understanding, both of those firefighters were rescued by the dedicated rapid intervention team. So they were rescued by, out of one side of our mouths, we're saying, hey, it's less than 10% of the time. And out of the other side of our mouths, I can say, hey, look, here's 2 fires that occurred within a couple of years each other that, in bordering counties where the rapid intervention team was the hands-on, rescuers. Do I have that right? Or what do you know about those incidents?
Yeah, so I was fortunate to really have my perspective changed about RIT and how things go down just by being one of the people that did the after action report for Josh Laird after that fire. So for us, interesting enough, and you see it out of the majority of Maydays, is that they happen with the first couple inch companies that get there. They happen early on, most commonly. Another one like, hey, 360 is not being done. A lot of things that lead up to that Mayday. Maybe some decisions initially that, hey, we're not getting the full picture. So in this particular one, they were on the scene for a couple minutes operating as an initial engine company. Everyone else kind of all converged at once. So all the companies from the initial alarm were there. However, the fifth due, who would have been our rapid intervention crew, they were not. They were involved just because once it happened, they were the only engine company that was operating, so everybody became involved in the rapid intervention. That became the incident within inside the incident. But then as other units arrived from the rapid intervention dispatch, we built it out, and those crews then made the rescue. So if you want to say that, yeah, hey, the rapid intervention team itself made the rescue, sure, but it really became an all-encompassing incident within the incident. And if you want to think about like, hey, the fire suppression, search, any of those other things weren't happening. It was solely the rapid intervention uh, as the incident itself.
That was the primary incident objective, was the rescue of Laird, right? And everything else was being restructured as necessary to support that. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, no, so there was a lot of lessons learned, but they were the sole engine company that was operating. The other units had just arrived. It was a McMansion up a steep hill, long driveway. So by the time the crews even get there, they're already worked up. They're gathering hose lines, getting their equipment, and several units had converged at the front door when the Mayday happened.
Yeah.
So, and interesting enough, we'll talk about some of the psychology of when Maydays happen, but a lot of them, you talk to them after the fact, and some people don't even remember, what happened. Others don't remember much of the incident at all. Some people can tell you completely what was happening, where people were. We were able to take timelines from pictures and stuff and kind of piece it all together. But it broadened my perspective on how people are going to act when it happens. But so when you talk about an incident, if it was a regular fire, other things weren't getting done. So there was not a search for civilian life. There was, we weren't taking lines above the fire. Other things that we would be doing just became
Because there was now a
solely
Mayday, those things weren't happening.
solely the Mayday. It became our 100% focus. And I'm not going to say that that was the wrong thing given the conditions.
Yeah.
But off the, your normal situation, other things weren't getting done. So we did focus on the life hazard, but if there would have been a civilian life hazard, then I don't know that we would have been able to handle that.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, I think that when you look at a Mayday incident, first off, they're all unique, right? I mean, there is, we say it all the time, there is no silver bullet for a Mayday. There's so many different events and so many different versions of the same event, that they all have to be kind of treated as they lie, I think, but one of the things that when you look at those incidents, pretty much, I think that one of the key things in any Mayday situation is the number one thing that's got to happen is you got to continue to put the fire out, right? I mean, that's at the top of our Mayday checklist. And, So that means you got to keep getting the lines on the fire. You might be able to let above go if that's not going to cause a collapse hazard or something. You got to keep doing the ventilation because that improves the conditions. But to what you're saying there, Chris, I mean, one of the few things that you can um, abandon or repurpose your manpower from, and it sucks to do that, is the civilian search. If you have a known firefighter down and you have limited manpower, obviously it's a terrible thing to have to do. But if you have to steal manpower from anywhere, that's probably going to be what it is, because the rest of it's got to keep going, right? I mean, Floyd, you got
Yeah.
some thoughts on that?
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
So we kept hand lines on the fire to try to keep it in check. But you say about every situation's different. And one thing we don't think about, we read these reports from all the fires that are happening, from line of duty deaths or even close calls, and you read it. At that point, you're reading it just like a book, and sometimes you can predict what's going to happen. But when you're in the moment and the Mayday's going to happen that you don't even know, uh, you know when you're reading the reports, you're reading it backwards. You know what happens, and we're leading up to it. Versus when the Mayday is going to happen, you're reading the book, and you don't know the ending.
Yeah.
So every situation's a little different, and just no different than any books we may read.
Well, I know it's a very difficult thing to talk about. I'm sure. I mean, you and I have talked offline about this stuff before. I know, obviously our friends, Sean and Frank. I mean, a lot of Frederick County guys, I know obviously it's a very tough incident for everybody, but I do think, if anything, it's important that, what happened to Josh is it's talked about, it's learned from, people are hearing about it, it's not forgotten, and that there's like anything, there's lessons to learn from it. One of the things I was very interested in that you talked about earlier, because you have a very unique perspective, that not only working for the department where that happened, but also being part of the after action reviews and all that kind of stuff. You mentioned, in passing, you were mentioning kind of some of the, I think you said some of the psychology or things that kind of came up. Like, do you have anything more you would share on that? There's a lot of things we commonly talk about, I think, when we talk about these Maydays and these RITs and stuff like that, but it's not often that you get to talk to somebody that really, was close to one and really got to dive into that. And I think there's probably a lot of unique stuff maybe you could share on that.
Yeah, so one of the things that we dived into was a human performance element. So big in the military hasn't become as big in the fire service, but it's getting there and it's catching on. And right before NIOSH had their little hiccup of leaving and then coming back, that was one of the things that uh, they've said that they were going to dive into. But so we know so much about Maydays, and we bring things to the table. We bring equipment that a lot of similarities. We look at all these incidents and we look at the equipment and okay, well, if we had this and we had that, but think about it like as a computer. Hey, you can have a computer, but if you don't have the software to run the computer, it's worthless. You might as well use it as a wheel chock. So what we need to do is dive into our people and think about like hey, in the military, you go in, you take on fire, you get that fight or flight response, but people do all kinds of crazy things. They talk about the body's physiological reaction, and the people losing, having bowel movements, peeing themselves, whatever, because hey, now all of a sudden something significant has happened, and that's your body's response. So one of the things that we looked at was the Yerkes-Dodson curve. So out of this, it talks about the stress that your body has and anxiety going through incidents that it hasn't encountered. Which for us, like, hey, we can plan for Maydays all day long, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're ready for one when one happens. So when it happens, it's like getting hit in the face, and now how are you going to react? So it's being able to control yourself, which I think is going to be a huge driver in future trainings for the fire department. I think it's going to be one of those like, hey, we're trying to do stress inoculation and improve our ability to handle those extreme circumstances. We're already to the point where like, hey, we encounter things that the normal human doesn't on a regular basis, but uh, you know we encounter stress that sometimes you don't know what your guys are going to do. And anybody in the fire department that's been involved in training, especially as an instructor, and you start seeing people do crazy things, a lot of it is a stress response. And you ask them after the fact, or you run fires and like, hey, as a chief doing after action reports, or just, tailboard hot washes with people, and you ask what they're, what they were thinking. And a lot of times after the fact, they're like, okay, hey, they know what should happen, but they didn't do it because they had some kind of stress response. And they start losing things like, hey, you lose dexterity, tunnel vision, auditory exclusion. So, and we saw this on the incident after the fact of asking people like, hey, why did you do this? And people not remembering things, and the things that happen, all related to the stress response. And I'll tell you, out of interviewing, I'll just say, 20 or 30 people from the initial alarm, uh, our most solid performers, uh, maybe five of them were solid, knew exactly what was going on, and some of them were either well trained, experienced, or military background.
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of those things like, if you've never been involved in one of those things, like, I guess it's like going to war. Like, I never been to war, but what, you don't know how you're going to react exactly until that first shot is fired. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, I think we all hope that we train hard enough and we do the things like the stress inoculation and things like that to best prepare ourselves mentally for that, because it is definitely not only a physical thing or a skill thing, but it is certainly a mental thing. Floyd, what are your thoughts on that stuff? Are you guys trying to integrate any of that kind of stress inoculation, human performance stuff, any of that kind of thing?
So that last discussion was phenomenal. We look at the human performance side of it, and I think for myself, I reflect on it as a training chief. I look at some departments, and mine is probably no different. We probably don't practice the fundamental skills as closely enough as we should. Just the fundamentals of stretching a hand line. That is oftentimes like asking too much. And then I look and go, well, then when's the last time a firefighter has done a face piece change from a RIT bag? Or, when's the last time a firefighter has performed a simple survival skill? And without that, as a perishable skill, without the repetitive nature of that, when you look back at that, that Yerkes Dodson curve again, we're going to have people that just make bad decisions when that really happens. And the problem is, any fire ground, any day, and Nick, we just spent the weekend talking about these bread and butter fires and the level of complacency. Every single fire has an element of a mayday waiting, right? Like even the simple ones. And yet, we go on and I take the blame as deputy chief of training that I would love to have a larger portion of my training spent just on the nature of RIT and survival. Just so we're better acclimated towards that environment, that we may be focused, right? And like you mentioned, some of our firefighters that maybe come from that combat background where they've had that adrenaline cortisol dump, maybe they can function at a better level just because of stress inoculation, where a lot of our firefighters, they come to work every day and they're immediately complacent, and it's you preach it to them, and then when the moment happens, they're ill prepared, and then afterwards we can do a lot of excuse making, but that doesn't help. So I would say, as deputy chief of training, for my department, that's a focus that I have to make, is that we need to really get back to those survival skills, preventing the need for Mayday, and then responding to that Mayday appropriately. And then I know later in the program here, we'll talk about the command side of it. Not only is there that, there's the response of the members that are suffering the Mayday or trying to straighten that out, but there's a response, there needs to be an activated response at the command side to focus on the incident and the details even more, which is difficult. It's high stress.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely want to talk about some of that, like what we're, the command thinking or the management thinking about how to react to this Mayday, or what we're going to do with that. But I mean, it comes up nowadays in all the conversations, I think, are all the good ones about this human performance. I think physical fitness is a big part of that. I you know, I myself, Floyd, I feel you. I mean, I feel like there's just not enough time in any day to do all the things
Yeah,
I want to do. And
I
I
almost feel
want
like
to,
as part of my training plan, I think if that's not built in, then we're really failing our firefighters. At least I am. I'm failing my firefighters to prepare on a skill that could be, it could be the skill that literally saves their life.
yeah. Well, I'm not to put you on the spot, Chris, but since we're hammering on this, I think this is a cool thing. And I'm curious myself, you know, do you, I mean, you talk about stress inoculation or the human performance things. And I know you guys have been doing a lot with like O2X on that kind of side of things too. Do you have, all right, so like I'm training my RIT company, or I'm training my guys for this Mayday, and I can train them how to call a who, what, where Mayday. You know, I can train them how to, you know, do an air pack conversion or resolve a face piece emergency, like all the task level skills, right? I can even teach them how to run the Mayday on the board. But you know, when you talk about, are there any drills or evolutions or things that you guys have discovered on, you know, that can help identify or help hone particularly that human performance or stress inoculation side of things? Is there any specific evolutions you could throw out there that you guys have done with that or anything?
So, as a department, no, we haven't. So, but I'll tell you though, it was one of those fighters talk about like, hey, the fight isn't won on the mat or on the boxing ring, whatever. It's won in the gym, and I think it's no different for us, not only in the gym but in the training. So I think it's so many things involved. So you know, we talk about maintaining being in good shape, and that helps you physically, which is obviously going to help you on the Mayday situation, but it also helps you mentally because you're keeping your heart rate down, you're maintaining that peak performance zone, as they like to talk about, to be able to operate. And so that's one element. But then how do we get there? So building slide decks. So like I'll tell people, as an engine company officer, I'd always come in and I'd go old school logbook and I'd look at the calls that they had, and I was constantly thinking about, like, okay, if I run the incident there, exactly what am I going to do? Same way with running the calls for the day. Like, hey, we run an EMS call. I'm acting like it's a house fire, but we're going there, and I'm thinking things in my head, and I'm building that slide deck. And it's no different for the Maydays. The problem is that people are more focused on being those first engine companies or whatever, and doing an excellent job, not necessarily thinking about, hey, it's a Super Bowl, we got 5 minutes left in the game and we're down 14 points, and how do we beat this? And that's how you have to think with a Mayday, because you're already behind the game. It's kind of like sending somebody into a house fire, like, hey, we're responding as an engine company, you got one trapped and nobody can have any turnout gear. You're keeping the playing field even now. Like, hey, now we got a firefighter that's trapped, he's protected, and he needs help. So that's a bad situation.
Yeah.
So we have to be mentally prepared, like mentally, physically prepared. And when we're doing that training, so you think about the rookies, like, hey, we bring rookies in and we stress them out while we're trying to do training. But once they get off probation, like, we're not being hard on them. So I was thinking, like, hey, if I do training, make it as hard as you can. If I fail, I fail, but I like the challenge. And I think that we should all be looking at it like that. Hey, take me to the point of failure, and if I pass, make it harder. If I don't pass, then back it off a little bit and keep me going until I get there. But we need to constantly push ourselves to be better and better. And at the end of the day, like, hey, you may encounter a Mayday that you're still not good enough, but you're moving as close to you can to winning. So you know, some of the other things like building in training with time constraints, doing things like space confinement, eliminating visibility, adding things in that, like, hey, you can't hear. We're doing. You're now on the RIT crew, and pop in earplugs and throw some loud noise in there where crews can't operate, talking to each other, because that's the kind of stuff, like, you don't know what you're going to encounter, and
Yeah.
the first time you do encounter that shouldn't be when the Mayday's happen.
Yeah. I think that's so true. I mean, there's that old saying in there, you know, it's better to fail in the firehouse than it is on the fire ground, right? And I mean, I think there's something to be said for that. Like, if you are not if you're not running drills in the firehouse to the point where you're failing, you're not training hard enough. And now don't misread that. We shouldn't be. We're not going to be. We don't need to get anybody, heat stress injury or hurt them intentionally. But the point is if you're not training to the point of failure, then you're not pushing your limits. And the Mayday will push your limits, to or beyond a point that you can't control. And so the best chance you have is to, push to those limits under controllable circumstances in training so that you can get yourself as ready as you can, I guess, right?
Right.
Hey, one of the most important things that I didn't make mention out of that was breathing control. So they teach it in the police to be able to box breathe or control your breathing in order to bring your heart rate down to where you can think about it. And I'm humble enough to say that, hey, I've been in situations that I can tell I'm on the back end of that curve, and not necessarily to say that I'm not thinking straight, but I can tell that I'm having a stress response. And like I know for me, one of the things, like instantly I get dry mouth. So and you could run 50 fires and all of a sudden, like, hey, this one's different, whatever the situation. And sometimes it could be the same fire, but a different response, like, hey, you haven't slept, you haven't done whatever, and you're not on your game, and you have some kind of stress response. So I know for me that's a trigger. I know that it exists, and then I'll control my breathing through the various techniques that are out there. I won't even go into that right now, but and I can tell you that I bring myself right back, and then it's game time.
Man, that's awesome. And I mean, I think it's important stuff for everybody to think about because Floyd, you mentioned earlier, like, back in the 90s or whatever. And I was saying to my fire chief earlier, we were talking about Mayday stuff, and he's been on the job way longer than I have. But, he was, I was talking about, I felt like for me that like the whole RIT thing, that became a thing in like the mid 90s, right? I mean, is that
Oh
how you
yeah.
about remember it? So,
So I remember I was a live-in at Progress Fire Company, right? And so I was 23, and we got invited to, like, Pottsville, Pennsylvania was running an FDNY RIT seminar. They brought in some FDNY rescue and squad guys for the weekend, and we went up there, and this whole RIT thing was like vogue. I mean, it was huge, and so we did some scenarios, and the pass alarm went off. You went in, you did a directed search to the pass, and then packaging and everything, and a lot of down and dirty tricks. And then, like, but the point of it was that you were prepared to respond. And looking back then, it was like, again, it was 1990. That might have been like 96, 97. There was no discussion of the proactive nature of RIT. Like, you were poised to make this rescue, but you were in the front yard ready to go, right? Maybe you walked around the building a 360 and looked, but you didn't really do anything else because you were supposed to be fresh. And then I think somewhere along the way, from data, we said, and we realized that, like, this group of firefighters in the front yard was not offering a lot of utility when there was plenty of other things to do. So now we shift fast forward to today, where we speak about proactive RIT, and we've discovered a million things that we can do in a fire ground and still be available to engage if something goes south. So um, I love Nick, and I know you're going to have a piece on this. We talk about RIT supporting VES, right? Like, that to me is like a force multiplier on a fire ground when your RIT can support limited VES operations. They're outside, they're not going in, but man, what a great use. If you're a VES department that believes in that, you've got those assets there.
yeah, I think it goes to a lot of the many things that rapid intervention company can support in a proactive fashion. But and one of the things I wanted to mention before I forget is like that whole thing, like, when RIT started as a formal concept, in the let's say mid late 90s, it was really kind of billed as a specialty. Is that, just like a department may or may not offer trench rescue as a service, department may or may not back then offer rapid intervention
You
as
were
a
you were
service.
you
And
were RIT certified.
yeah, you were RIT certified. You were a RIT company. As I remember it, they had tetrahedrons you could get for your helmet that would advise
Nick, were you
others
were
that
you
you
in a
were
RIT
RIT
were you in a
certified.
RIT certified department?
You know, actually we were. Yeah, I remember we would go, and that's how wild it was. Is like we had an arrangement that we would go like 4 towns over past
Yep.
4 other firehouses, and because we were RIT certified and they weren't.
That's how you got on boxes.
Yeah, but which was cool because we got to go to fires, you know. But it really flies in the face of kind of circling it back to what we were talking about earlier. Is when you look at, you know, the experience and you look at the data and you say, okay, you know, 88% of the people that are going to rescue the downed firefighter are already in the building. Well, they're already in the building because they're the average Joe firefighter doing the other firefighter tasks. There is no such thing as a RIT company. You know, there is no such thing as RIT certified. Everybody out there is standing next to a firefighter that they might have to rescue. And I don't care who you are, what your rank are, what fire truck you showed up on, or how long you've been doing this. Like, if that moment comes, you're going to have to engage. Like, you know, the old thinking was basically that, like, when the Mayday went down, the Red Sea was going to part, and all the average firefighters would you know, split and create a corridor for the RIT firefighters to come in and save the day. And that's just not the case. And, you know, I don't know. It is kind of concerning sometimes when we travel around the country. Like, the three of us talk about this, and I feel like we're just preaching to the choir. Like, we all know, like, we talk about this stuff all the time, but you'll go around and you'll talk to somebody and you'll say some things like that, and they'll be like, oh, really? I wasn't aware of that, you know, or I never heard about that, or some of the other things that I'm sure we'll get into about, you know, some things we would recommend you do or not do during a Mayday. I think that's a, you know, I think that's an interesting thing, is that a lot of people don't really look at themselves as that, hey, I could be the guy standing next to the downed firefighter.
Well, you know, Nick, when you bring that up, I think that when you look at like what the like so if you said to me today, hey Floyd, I want you to run I'll say a RIT academy, right? They're all fundamental firefighter skills, right? You know, performing a search based on a pass alarm, or utilization of a RIT pack, or packaging a firefighter for movement in a number of different ways, or moving a firefighter vertically or horizontally in a building, in or out of a window. Those are all pretty much fundamental skills. The only time that I think RIT could get technical is if we deal with where we have a building collapse where the firefighter is trapped in a building, and that may require some other equipment. However, even at that level, I think a lot of that is still fundamental with the use of basic hand tools, right? Like, I think that for rapid intervention, we got to keep it simple, and we got to keep it rapid and fast.
Yep. 100%. You know, you mentioned a couple of, like, we've mentioned proactive RIT a couple times, and I'll throw this out there. You know, and Chris alluded to it kind of early in the conversation, is there does become a balance. Like, I think both of you said something about this. There does become a balance. Like, when am I going to sign the RIT? You know, based on experience and data, is this next group of firefighters that's showing up, are they better off taking in a second hose line? Is that going to prevent the Mayday? Or are they better off standing out in the front yard in case one occurs? How do I justify, or how do I, you know, prioritize assigning a rapid intervention company if there are other primary tasks that haven't been done? Maybe there's a VES that could be done. Maybe the ventilation's not squared away yet. You know, and at some point you got to do it, right? And you know, I've worked for several different departments, and I've traveled around the country, and I've talked to fire departments, you know, where rapid intervention is assigned very early in the alarm assignment, maybe the second arriving company. And I've been to it when it's the last arriving company, or it's somebody that's special called at the end. I mean, we try to teach our guys to be very proactive. And you talked about the VES thing earlier. Our guys are empowered to do anything. When they're assigned rapid intervention, they're empowered to do anything that does not require to put their mask on, is not going to physically exhaust them, and can be safely abandoned quickly. And what that does is, if they don't have to put their mask on, they're not inside of the IDLH, right? We don't want to physically exhaust them in case they do have to engage in a Mayday or something. And we want them to be able to drop what they're doing and go away from it if a Mayday goes out. But there's so many things that fall in that box. So many things that if those are your rules or something like that, that you can do. You can go support the VES. You can do the horizontal ventilation. You can throw the ground ladders. You can secure the utilities. And what that frees up is, now you're making time where the other where the rapid intervention team is allowing the other interior firefighters to do more things. If an interior firefighter doesn't have to stay outside to throw the ground ladder because the RIT guy is going to do it, that's one more guy that can go in and do the search or go to the roof or do whatever other IDLH level task that needs to be done. Chris, do you guys have any guidance, or like in Frederick County, what can the RIT do? What can the RIT not do?
So I have a couple thoughts. I'm gonna give them to you. So first, I'm gonna go back to Floyd's RIT Academy. So my initial tests, in order to even perform the skills in the RIT Academy, I want to either acquired structure or something decent, and we can light the entire first floor off, and I want you to go in and put it out. So you pass that, then all right, you move on to everything else. So with RIT, I think we're going to be doing great. We're going, one side we're moving really positive. We're going with the hey, we're picking up everything from all this research. We're going to improve our RIT skills. But when you look at it in the fire service, like as firemen, like our hardcore firemen, I almost think that we're going backwards sometimes. Like, hey, unless you go somewhere, you go to your PG, your Harrisburg, somewhere where you can get some of that experience in good fire settings where you're getting the good jobs. The rest of the fire service isn't getting that, and it's not like it used to be in that aspect. So as far as the RIT crews doing things, so I'm all for it, but I'd like to say that if I'm going to be that initial rapid intervention, so like for us, hey, that fifth engine that's first pulling up, I just want to take like a quick breather and pump the brakes, and I want to be the eyes and kind of make sure things are solid. So one, I want to give us a solid 360. I want to see what I'm dealing with. Like, hey, if we don't have a basement fire, a lot of buildings, like, hey, we can look at the construction and tell, but when you look at a house now that even in the last 20 years, I want to take a quick basement peek, see what kind of floor joists I'm dealing with. Like, hey, do we have dimensional lumber, or do we have some other kind of crap that we're building with, whether it's plywood I-beams or 2x4 truss construction, whatever it is that we're dealing with now, to kind of give me an idea of what might happen in the structure. But we also know, like, hey, there's a couple things that are going to get firemen in Mayday situations. Like, hey, they're going to either fall through the floor. It's going to be some kind of collapse. They're going to have a medical, a rapid fire event, which has been significant. And a lot of times, I hate to say it, but we're bringing it on ourselves by our own actions. So being able to eye some of that up as the initial RIT IC, whatever, hey, I'm that unit officer, I'm eyeing things up. I want to make sure that things aren't going bad. The other thing, like talking to my crew, which I may not do initially. Like, hey, if I'm the initial engine company, like I'm cool with supporting some of the things, but I don't want to be overzealous. But it depends, everybody's situation is different. Like as we build out our rapid intervention, and I had that second engine company in the special service, by all means, I want them to get it if we can help, but don't overdo it. Like, hey, we have a bunch of overzealous firemen, and now, like, hey, I'm slamming ladders left and right like I'm a truck driver, and now, hey, the Mayday hits, and am I still game time ready? So I think there's some considerations there. Like, I think that the ventilation is important, but I also think it's important to eye up, like, hey, this is where the fire is now, and this is where I'm going to project it's going. Or, hey, I'm watching somebody do outside vent, and a huge problem that we have with the rapid fire events in the country is, like, hey, we have fire on a lower level, so and then people opening up top. So you have low intake, high exhaust, and now you got crews operating above the fire. Like that's a recipe for disaster, and that's going to get people burned up. And it's understanding that seeing it, but being able to operate at the same time. And depending on your fireground experience, like, hey, you may be able to do that and see and know what's going on, or you may just need to just, hey, take that breather. And it's no different. Like, as you get experience, you're going to be able to do more things, and you're going to be able to do them faster and see what's going on. And there's going to be varying levels.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome thoughts. I mean, yeah, it's a balance, right? I mean, like, yeah, you're right. If the rapid intervention is overdoing it under the guide of proactive RIT, then maybe we're robbing Peter to pay Paul there. One thing I kind of liked what you were talking about there about the rapid intervention officer and kind of really what they're doing in terms of that initial 360, really looking at things. One of the things that we started doing recently, and I'd be interested to hear your guys' feedback, is we started designating the rapid intervention company officer as the initial incident safety officer. Anybody who's been to any of our command training programs knows that, in most situations, for a variety of reasons, we're not generally in favor of making the one of the first chief officers the safety officer. We have other things we want to do there with command, the tactical supervisor, the command aide. But a safety officer position is a good thing to have for us. Where I work, the safety officer, in terms of being a chief officer, isn't generally going to be assigned until the fourth or later arriving chief officer. And so the way we've kind of plugged that gap is that until that happens, we are that RIT officer, the officer of for our case, the fifth arriving engine company, is the rapid intervention, and they have the second engine working with them. It's a whole thing. But anyway, that RIT company officer is that initial safety officer and has those jobs. And I kind of look at it this way: the more we've kind of done that is, what we end up having is we end up having a RIT group established. And for us, the RIT group consists of two engine companies. I like that you have an engine and a service company. We'll come back to that in a little bit. But for us right now, it's two engine companies. But you can picture if I have two engine companies and we make it a group, so that'll be the RIT group. And then the officer, which is one of the company officers of the RIT group supervisor, is basically the incident safety officer. Now you have this, incident safety officer that has, 4 or 5 firefighters with them that they can go around the incident and do proactive RIT things. And you have the officer that's looking at that, from an officer level perspective. And of course, if the RIT gets utilized otherwise, then they would no longer be that incident safety officer perspective. But so far, we've found good success with that. I don't know if you guys have ever thought about anything similar or any thoughts on that or anything, or Floyd, how are you guys doing that in Harrisburg?
No, not really. So our RIT officer is, exterior 360 ground laddering. They do give some feedback, I would say, to the incident commander. If they see something as they're doing a lap that's unique, something to think about. So there is some good feedback in that. So I guess in consideration, it is kind of like a safety officer position, given that feedback on what's going on. The other thing I want to say kind of about that RIT officer position, it's really important, that you're kind of, I would say, predicting the fire ground, right? You're in that position prior to the Mayday. You should be kind of looking at the building, how many companies are working where, are hand lines moving, does it seem like the fire's being extinguished? Listening to the radio, just listening to the vocal tone of the firefighters on the radio, that the communication sound positive, like we're achieving benchmarks. Walking that lap. Do you see anything? Can you predict something that's about to occur? And if you can predict what's about to occur, in what area of the building do you think that your RIT group may need to move to? And in that, I can start to talk to my members of my company and start to come up with a plan and say, hey, if this happens, or I think this may happen, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to enter. Here's the tools we're going to bring. And kind of, I think that's a really proactive thought process. And in a way, you're preparing yourself versus, again, that complacency of I'm going to stand here until somebody gives me permission to do something.
Yeah. Well, that's that what's the Mayday thinking. I mean, that's a big thing I like to talk about, for both the incident commander, and for the RIT company officer is, what's the Mayday, right? If we put up a fire, right? If I put up a fire and we look at a certain set of conditions and we look at a certain building type and we look at the operations that the companies are conducting, then you can look at that and say, okay, here's the anticipatable Maydays in this situation. It's a large open commercial. It's likely they're going to get lost or disoriented or run out of air. There's limited egress.
Correct.
There could be a collapse hazard from a wide open span. Okay, they got heavy fire on the lower floor of a 2-story house. They're probably going to be making searches on the floor above. There's an opportunity there for guys to get cut off. Egress is going to be an issue. And so if the incident commander and or the RIT officer can look at those situations and kind of anticipate things, well, then they can try to either do things to prevent that anticipatable Mayday, or prepare themselves to respond or react to that Mayday if it goes out. Now, you can't anticipate everything, but if you can anticipate 50% of it, then you only have to worry about the remaining 50 instead of 100%. So I love that way of thinking.
Nick, there's one other item you brought up that was kind of a quick point that you made, and I think it's a good question for us as a group to talk about. But like, how much help do I need in that RIT group? And you said you pair 2 engines. Frederick does an engine and a special service, but 4 firefighters in a RIT. When we look at locating a down firefighter, just locating the search part, not the removal, the rescue, just the search. 4 is probably a good start, but we know if it's truly a Mayday and if it's a deep Mayday, right? If it's a deep, like a deep disorientation or there's entrapment, then we know that's going to consume a lot of resources. So like, are we prepared to build out that RIT group to support a deep Mayday?
Yeah. Well, that's why I was saying earlier, I really like, the Frederick model of putting an engine and a service company. Could that be either a truck or a rescue squad, Chris?
Yeah, so hey, I'll talk about that for a second. So for us, like, hey, we have the initial engine, then you have either the truck or a squad, and then another engine company. So we break it out further, and I can't stress the importance of communication enough. But that initial engine company, like, hey, we use them as the initial recon. They're going to go in and find this person, figure out what we need, and get the ball rolling. The special service is going to be the extraction group. Like, hey, they're going in. Those guys are working together, working with that initial recon and getting the person out and figuring what we need to do. And that the second engine company is going to be your backup. Like, hey, they need replacements or something else is going to happen, and then they're going to be the secondary rapid intervention crew to help with them. But you know what? I was going to go somewhere else with that. I don't even remember, but that's how we broke those down.
Well, but I mean, so that reminds me a lot of like, and I think it was kind of cutting edge back in its day when it started. But like, I remember I was working in Fairfax in the early 2000s, and like their big thing was level 1, level 2, level 3 RIT, and like a level 1 RIT was the engine on the initial box. It was, one engine company on the first alarm assignment. That equaled level 1 RIT. If they upgraded it to level 2 RIT, don't quote me on exactly what the alarm package was, but I know it rounded out to at least 2 engines and a truck, maybe 2 engines, truck, and a squad and a chief. And now you had, 2 engines and some service companies with a chief as the RIT group. And, that was utilized on high hazard incidents, like say a grocery store fire or a commercial fire, things like that. And then your level 3 RIT was basically in reaction to a Mayday, and it was a full alarm, full additional alarm and a collapse task force. And, so I like that idea. But then the other thing I liked is I watched when I was working in the district in DC, I watched it kind of go through a couple different iterations of, who was RIT and how it was done and everything. And, ultimately where it was when I left the department was, you had the 5th 2 engine, which was the last engine on the box. They were your initial RIT. And then the ladder company on the working fire dispatch would team up with it. So at the end of the day, you got an engine and a truck working in the RIT group together. And I thought that was good because really the primary plan was the engine company's primary job as in the rapid intervention group was to identify an attack line, and they were going to identify an attack line, the appropriate line off of one of the wagons, up towards the building, and they weren't necessarily going to pull that line because. But they weren't necessarily going to pull the line, but they were going to say, hey, look, that's going to be our line if we need it for RIT stuff. And they didn't pull it because if you pull it now and you pull it to the wrong place, it's going to be harder to reposition it later if you need it to go to the back or something. But anyway, the engine company's job was to have a hose line. And during a RIT deployment, their job was going to be to get that hose line to the location of the downed firefighter and create a defendable space. Right, keep the fire off of them. You could use it for hydraulic ventilation to improve conditions around there possibly, but their job was to get a line to them. And then you had the truck company, and we had 5 people on the truck and split into the inside and outside team. So the inside team of the truck, your job, you had 3 people. You had the officer, the bar, and the hook. And the officer had the search rope and the thermal imaging camera, and they would, lead the way. And then you had the irons firefighter, and they basically had breaching tools, irons, or whatever other appropriate tools. But their job was to basically break through shit, clear the way to get to the downed firefighter. And then the outside team, the tillerman and the truck driver, actually stayed outside, and they were kind of like your plan B. They were like the people that were going to bring you the thing that you realized you needed, or they were going to be the people that when you got them to the window at the rear, they brought the ladder to the rear, they breached the wall or whatever. And then obviously if the incident commander needed to, they would put additional companies into the RIT group if they needed more people. But I really liked that idea of the mix and match between the engine and the service company, because at the end of the day, what you got a hose line to create a defendable space. You got a very light and mobile entry crew, that initial crew, the inside team off the truck. The other thing they brought with them was the RIT SCBA. So the inside team off the truck was going to be able to make a beeline to this guy, find him quick, resolve an air emergency, package, begin to do basic rescue. If there was a basic rescue to be done, the engine was there with a hose line creating a defendable space. And then you had the outside team of the truck that could engage in whatever manner necessary if it was a more technical rescue, or they needed something on the outside or whatever. So I like that. I think having a balance of those different types of companies kind of gives you those different options. Is that kind of the thought process behind like how you're setting that up there in Frederick? Or
so as you guys go, I have about 49 more random thoughts. So I like 2 things. One, I do like a hose line because those rapid fire events, like while some people are on their A game deploying a hose line, other people are not. So I do like having that charged hose line so that we can immediately take place and jump in there, man, because those rapid fire events, like as you look at those, some of those things like Cherry Road being a common when they had fire coming up from the basement at like 30 miles an hour. How are you going to beat that? So you got to be able to get in there and provide some kind of protection immediately. At the same time, I like eyeing up and being able to say like, hey, if we need a second line or need to pull a different line, this is exactly what we're pulling it off of. And if I'm in charge of the RIT, like, hey, if somebody else pulls it for something, I need to keep an eye on that and be able to tell my crew, like, hey, they took our line. This is what we're going to use as our next line. And rural firefighting, as strange as it is, like, hey, a lot of us are urban people here in Frederick. We get a little bit of everything. So we'll get a tanker up close. We consider them a nurse tanker. It's going to kind of be the buffer for that first in engine company. And our rapid intervention crew will pull a line off of that, knowing that, hey, you have 3,000 gallons off of a tanker or a tender, depending where you're from. And that's going to provide you quite the protection that's not connected to anything else. And that's something you can utilize.
Yeah.
I forgot my 49th thought again.
Well, that's a really good thought about the RIT. I mean, if I remember that correctly, well, that was a thing at Laird's Fire, wasn't it? Didn't I remember hearing about or seeing about like a tanker that was basically very aggressively beached to get extra water up there or whatever to support that.
Yeah, you gotta love that. And I'll give a shout out to you. It's a good DC fireman driving the tanker.
Yeah,
So,
that's
man,
that's
they
what we
had
do, brother.
every single line off the initial engine company, and where that house was. Now, like, hey, for us in a rural setting now, like we're putting two engine companies there, but in this particular setting, like, hey, it was just one engine. They laid out, a significant amount of hose. I forget what it was, but I feel like total is like 1,000+ foot lay, and then so all they had up there was the initial engine and the truck until that tanker brought itself up there through a very odd situation. But yeah, that's how they made it work. And all the hose lines were gone. Everything was deployed off the engine and being used.
Yeah. Well, hey man, when it goes down, all bets are off, right? I mean, it's time to get it done however you need to get it
You gotta do
done.
what you got to do.
That's
Um,
right.
let's talk a little bit about the command management of it, because I know there's been a lot of changes over the years in, the thoughts on how the incident commander is going to manage a Mayday. And, the old school thinking on that was principally that when a Mayday went out, it was basically going to become two different incidents, right? We're going to have, okay, now we have the firefight and now we have the Mayday, and those are basically two separate things. And we're going to create rescue branches or Mayday branches or whatever. We're going to change radio channels. How has that thinking evolved in your guys' area? And, Chris, I'll start with you, and then Floyd, I'll throw it over to you, because you know, I hate to, or I don't hate to. I think it's a good thing that we keep talking about, Josh's Mayday, because I think it's good that we learn from these things, and I think it helps, bring value to tragedy. But I know obviously one of the things in talking to many of the members from Frederick and listening to the audio, that the different thought process around use of radio channels, and how, whether to separate the Mayday, whether to switch channels, pros and cons to each, that was definitely a thing. Could you talk about some of the discussion or what happened there? Or?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a couple things, and I'll tell you my thought process on it, which, um, interesting enough, you might not agree with. So, for us on this fire, 17 times Josh tried to make a radio transmission and couldn't get through. And
Mm.
when you look at Project Mayday, there are multiple things out there as far as too much radio traffic, people asking too many questions, um, a ton of different things. And so, from my perspective, I got two things. One, know your radio. So, at the time, we didn't know that if you hit the emergency button on our radio system, that it'll give that radio a priority. So think of it as a three-tiered system. Dispatch takes the ultimate priority. They can walk over everybody and transmit when they want. Everybody else is operating on tier 3 all the time. And then if you have a Mayday and you use your red orange emergency button, then on our radio system it'll give you what's called ruthless preemption, and it'll give you priority over everybody else. So if I'm that other officer, hey, I'm the officer of the fourth in engine company, and I'm telling you that, I'm doing whatever, and I have a Mayday, or I'm trying to get through and I can't, and, it's an emergent situation. If I hit that emergency button, it's going to give my radio priority and it's going to bump you off. So even if you're mid conversation, it's saying, see ya, and I'm going to be able to get my message through. We didn't know that during the Mayday, and that would have significantly helped Josh give us who knows what transmissions we never did hear from. So, and that's a cool thing about technology with the radio system. We were able to see that happen. We also saw how many other people tried to make radio transmissions, and within the report, from the time of Mayday till the time we actually got him out, which was pretty fast. At some point, we calculated the number of radio transmissions, how many seconds they were, and how much radio time occurred versus no one talking at all. And people like to talk a lot, but if you look at it, that's every Mayday across the country. So, with that being said, I think that it depends on your situation. So those initial maydays very frequently happen the first couple engine companies that are operating on the scene. And as an incident commander, to me, like, hey, at that point, I'm keeping everything on the same radio channel. I'm only one person. I'm nobody special. I can't operate two radios. Everybody's doing their thing. We know that the initial engine companies or the initial companies operating area are more likely to make the rescue. So in that instance, I think you keep everybody on the same channel. I think that as you have a more complex incident, or if you have a command aid, and maybe not even the command aid, it depends on the circumstances. So for us, in order for me to switch channels, I'm going to have a couple considerations. So, like Josh's fire, they had both the ops channel, and then it was a rural water scenario where we didn't have hydrants close by. So they also had another talk group with another person in the command post at being able to operate on that water supply talk group. So, and to me, water supply is important, man. We can't get the fire out if we don't have water, and if we don't get that straight, it's not going to get better. So, in those instances, like, hey, those two people are tied up in the command post. If you happen to have a third, which for us, I'll be honest, like we go from having, you could have two chiefs on assignment, like our two battalion chiefs, or you could have 10 with, multiple volunteers. It really depends on the moment. So if I have that extra person and I'm able to have somebody, I may strongly consider switching over, just knowing that the majority of the Maydays in the country, um, like, hey, they're being tied up with radio traffic. We had the problem there. So I really think that it's a game time decision, but I do have thought processes in the back of my mind as far as the situation that I would encounter and what I have as far as the players and resources to consider what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a dynamic situation. I mean, I would say, for me, plan A is always going to be we're staying on the same channel. That's plan A. It might change. It could change, but it's unlikely. The reason that we look at changing radio channels is, like you said, people want to deal with people are talking too much. Well, what we really need to work on there is the culture of how much we're talking on the radio and what we're talking about. Like, I mean, I know in our department, we teach a communications chain of command, who talks to who, and we talk to them about what you talk about on the radio, what needs to be said and what doesn't. And we also are very aggressive about utilizing a command structure that manages span of control. And span of control, in addition to the other parts of the command stuff, helps also manage communications span of control. If we're using that incident management structure properly, there are less people talking on the radio in general. And so I think that overall, the goal of departments should be to control radio traffic for all circumstances, for your bread and butter room and contents fire all the way through your multi-alarm Mayday, because the controlled radio communication and radio discipline, that's going to pay dividends on any incident that you go to. Because the other thing that I get worried about, and it relates to a little bit of a personal experience, is I've been involved in multiple Maydays, at different levels of my career. And I remember one very specifically in DC, where, I was a backstep firefighter. And when they put the Mayday out, and they said, and this was back in the day, so it was back when changing channels was still a hot thing. But they said, all right, everybody except the Mayday switch to channel 4. And I remember it clear as day. I said, F that. I know that dude, and that was willful disobedience. And yep. I mean, that's not advice. I'm not advocating you do that. I would not recommend that you disobey anybody. But I think it is a reality that if you have a Mayday and you tell everybody else to change radio channels, some people aren't going to hear you say that. Some people are going to make a choice to disobey you, and some people are going to try to change radio channels and end up on a completely different channel. And yep. Now you're all on a shit sandwich. And, so I really kind of come back to, I think that we have to look at the reasons why we would want to change channels, and we have to address those for all incidents. And if that is, chain of command, if that is people talking on the radio about too much bullshit, we need to address that for every fire we go to and not try to act differently when we have the worst fire of our life. Because I think that, I'm a big, here's the thing, here's the way I look at some of this, and it might sound very odd initially, but a downed firefighter is a trapped victim. It's a victim. They're wearing air pack and turnout gear, and them, but it's a fire victim. And, we don't say, look, there's multiple kids trapped in that building. The people that are trying to rescue the kids go to channel 2, everybody else stay on channel 1, right? That, we don't disconnect the firefight. We don't disconnect the other areas of operation, from the priority of the incident. In that case, the priority is the kids. And if there's a down firefighter, the priority is obviously, getting the down firefighter. And, I think that, if you also look at the fact that 88% of the rescuers are inside of the building, you want those people to hear what the down firefighter is saying, because Floyd, you might be next to him. And if you're on a different radio channel, how are you going to know that? So again, we could talk about this for a long time. It's kind of beyond the scope of the show to talk about that completely and differently, or completely to the end. But I think that is a big part of it. The other thing I would say is you have to know your radio systems. Like, after the Laird thing, Frank and I got to talking about the ruthless preemption, because apparently Frederick and us have the same style of FDMA. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but FDMA trunked radio system. And I talked to Frank, I talked to your fire chief, because we were trying to get the ruthless preemption stuff set up here. There was one day I was at the communication center, and I had a small army of nerds with me, like all the radio shop guys, communication center guys, and we're like on FaceTime with Frank, like trying to make this work. And bottom line is, my guys insisted that we could not set up our system to have the functionality that you guys have. And I'm going to take another shot at that. I'm going to see if we can look at that again, see if there was something we missed. But what I'm really saying that to say is that, people listening to the show, go talk to your nerd and figure out what your radio can and can't do, because there is so many different types of systems and there are so many different manufacturers that, all of them can and can't do things that other people can and can't do. So don't just take for granted because we said that our system will do this or won't do that yours won't. Like you got to go figure that out for you, because they're so unique. Another thing that's interesting I think about is that there are so many departments around here, around the country, where people are still on standard conventional radio systems. They're on UHF or they're on VHF, and they're on conventional repeaters or simplex channels. And, when you're on like a simplex channel like that or something like that, you got a whole new dynamic, because on a simplex radio channel, you and I can both be talking at the same time. It's going to sound like garbly-gook to whoever's listening. They're not going to understand either of us. But the scary thing is you and I both think that we got our radio transmissions out. We don't know that one person was talking over us. And so there's definitely a lot of stuff there with the communication stuff. Floyd, you got anything to add on that? Or
just with the communication side, I just echo back. Our region made that switch now where we're going to operate on a single channel. We've kind of gotten away. And I remember when I first came into the department, it was that whole 2-channel thing. So I think locally, even with our city now, we don't necessarily position division officers as well as we could. That would be an element that would assist with the kind of the Mayday management, but that's a conversation for another class.
Yeah, for sure. So, some other stuff I would kind of mention from the command perspective thing. The way we're looking at that too is we're not creating some kind of like rapid intervention branch or, thing or something like that. Like if the Mayday goes down on the first floor and Chief Mullendore is the Division I supervisor, they're going to be, the Mayday is going to be their primary responsibility. It's happening in their area. They're going to reprioritize the companies that he has assigned to work on that issue. I'll send him support as he needs to, but the idea is there, it's like we talk about in our command classes, is we're building the incident from the get-go, assuming that we're going to have the offensive fire with people trapped and a Mayday. And so that if we build that structure from the get-go, then when that's what's happened, or when the Mayday goes out, then we already have the command structure in place to handle that, right? If you've been in charge of the first floor the whole time and you know what's going on there, then who is in a better position to manage the Mayday that just happened on the first floor? Do you guys kind of do the same kind of thing, or what's the thoughts in your departments on that?
I think that's a key concept, right? Is I'm putting, I will say, eyes on the problem immediately, right? And then that person can determine what those resource needs are. And I think in using those strong division officers, that makes complete sense to me. And then staying on the same channel allows that coordination and communication with everybody on the fire ground. So I think that's they're interrelated.
Yeah. Chris, what about you?
So I think it's an interesting concept, and I think it goes back to everything like this. Like, hey, if you train like that and constantly do it, build that slide deck, then that's what your troops are going to revert to. But I'm also a skeptic based off of what people are going to do. Sometimes I think there's a lot of thinking on the fly based off of what your people are going to do, and if you can even recognize what's going to happen. So I think it's important that we do get on the same page, but having a deep dive into something, and that's an interesting talk, and you and I have talked offline, but to know what people are going to do that you don't see in all the line of duty death reports or the after action reports that happens. You always have to, like, hey, you have to have plan A, B, C, and D. And, I think that we've talked about the mindsets behind all those things.
Yeah.
I think one thing I would, oh, sorry, Nick, one thing I'd point out,
No,
like
good.
if there's ever been a time for fireground discipline, right? And, day to day, just our fundamental calls, right? We talk about fireground discipline, following your orders, staying in your division, proper communication, benchmarking, all the things we talk about. If there's ever been a time to dial that in, it's during a Mayday, which is unfortunately the most stressful thing that we're trying to work through. This additional could be a severe problem, and I think that we're not going to. We want to keep that fireground discipline tight. To make that happen, again, it goes back to training again. We bring up that training function in every single podcast that we do. We've got to build that discipline into how we train.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I,
and
I think
go ahead, Chris.
I think talking about, like, hey, you may mention about fireground discipline, but that goes to every single call. Like, and we let things slide on your simple box alarm or whatever, and we don't say anything about it. Then shame on us. We should be busting their chops, because how they're going to operate then, if we don't bust their chops on the small stuff, then they're definitely going to do
It's
it
a
on the big
slow
stuff.
slide for deviation, right? It's a slow slide.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, that's certainly true. I mean, I think, you guys were saying stuff about it earlier. I mean, really, if you look at it, every fire we go to is a Mayday. Sometimes it just didn't happen. You know what I'm saying? But every fire we've been to could have had a Mayday. Some of them do, some of them don't. But, some days that's just luck. I mean, part of it is preparation. Part of it is, our upfront investment. But I mean, we talk about that in all the classes too. Also, the fire always gets a vote. You can do everything the right way and still end up in a Mayday situation. And, that's what makes firefighting dangerous. I kind of like what Chris was saying there earlier too. We can talk about the radio channels. We can talk about how we're going to do the command management structure and stuff like that for a Mayday. And I think one thing it's safe to say about those is that, there's always a couple ways it could go. There's always a couple of things that could happen. But I think that, like everything else that we push out there from our group about firefighting, is that what's most important is you got to have a plan. Like you got to have a starting platform, right? And regarding Mayday management, our department's plan, the way we're going to operate is plan A is we're going to stay on the same channel, and the division supervisor where the Mayday is going to manage the Mayday. And it could evolve further from that. Other things could happen. It could be a very technical rescue. It could be a reason why we need to switch channels. There could be a reason why we need to deploy another supervisor. But if you don't know what plan A is, you can't possibly know what plan B is. You should always have plan A, B, C, and D. But I think it is good to have a template, to have a starting platform, to say, hey guys, this goes down, here's where we're going to start. We may go other places from there, but here's where we're going to start, because in the middle of that, it's so chaotic. I mean, the last Mayday that I was in charge of, it was over in less than 2 minutes. By the moment I was figuring out what had really happened, thankfully the Mayday had resolved itself. And, we look at some of the other, case studies, other Maydays that we've all been involved in the classes that we talk about. And that's kind of one of the core things is some of this stuff goes down so quick that if you don't have a plan, if you don't have a starting point, if you haven't already trained on this stuff, you are shit out of luck the moment they say Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. That is not the moment to say, all right, guys, time out. Let's talk about this. Here's what I think we're going to do here, right? Now's the time you got to execute on a plan.
But think about that from the RIT officer perspective. So, how many people are putting together a rapid intervention team that are, they're standing by in the front yard and they haven't communicated that plan. Like, hey, if something happens, this is exactly what you're going to do. And this is what hey, I expect you to do this. I expect you to do that. And communicating everything beforehand. At the same time, think about it like, hey, I'm combat ready. I'm across the board. Now your EMS, you have a patient coming out. Hey, that's now not the time to be opening up my AED pads, taking my bag valve mask out of the bag. Like all that stuff should be done, and I should be ready. I'm not saying, hey, take it out because we think a Mayday might happen, but if I'm doing EMS and the Mayday happens, that's time to be stoked, popping stuff up. And at the same time, like I'll take you back to your medic days. I was waiting for the response.
Are you talking to Floyd?
And so that's the time to draw stuff up. Don't wait until it's time to give it. That the Mayday's happening. At that point, if we don't use it, we don't use it. But draw that stuff up, have it ready. You think about it across the fireground. Doesn't matter whether you're on a RIT team or you're doing EMS. It's going to take care of our guy coming out. Make sure you're ready.
Well, you make a really good point there, Chris, because I mean, it's kind of like there's who else on the fireground has that kind of preparation time, right? Like, look, we want the RIT to be proactive. We don't want them to just be standing there doing nothing. But, when you're on the first due engine or first due truck, like we're going in. I don't have time to tell you shit, right? But when we're in the RIT, I definitely have a little bit more discretionary time to go, hey, man, you seeing this over here? What are you thinking if this goes down? Hey, why don't we get this out? Why don't we get that ready? All right, if something like this happens, here's what's, what I'm saying? Like you definitely have a little bit more time, I think, there to conversate, and don't take that for granted, So good points.
That's good.
So we've been bouncing this around here for a good 90 minutes. I want to kind of send it around, let you guys kind of throw out any final thoughts you'd kind of give on tonight's conversation, and then we'll kind of wrap things up. Floyd, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, so a couple things. I don't know why, but like an hour and a half goes by really quick, and there's always more content than we can ever get to, which is a good thing, I guess, right? Just something to think about for the group. I don't know if anybody knows this, but if any of you listen to the weekly scrap that's on the podcast, there was Lieutenant Bissell Ibrahim. He's a lieutenant in Orlando, Florida. He and a group with grant funding have reinvigorated the firefighter rescue surveys. So they are picking up the organization of incident analysis across the nation in a survey format. And apparently, from how the lieutenant explained it, they're doing it a different format for how they're collecting the data. So it's much more analytical. So it's a great thing now that Chief Abbott's work is going to be continued, and we can continue to refine I hate to say it, but like how on the fire ground, how are we getting ourselves screwed up? How are we getting caught? And what are our best methods to alleviate that? So I think that, I would ask everybody on the podcast, if you're watching, go back to your department. Let's this month, let's try to fit in a good survival or RIT drill. Let's get back to some fundamental basics. This is a good time to kind of have that conversation and go back and be honest about it. That probably most of us are not well positioned if it goes down on a fire ground tonight. I can honestly say that even in my department, I probably haven't organized a RIT drill in 6 months, and that's a travesty. So let's all collectively go back and prepare for the worst tour that we could have, and get ourselves ready. Great conversations just on again, the management at the skill level, the firefighter, the organization company officer dealing with that stress, and then how the command officer is going to work through the Mayday and keep the fire ground like accountable and moving forward.
Chris, what you got?
So I hope all these guys listening take something back to the kitchen table and have conversations with their shift. And I hope it spurs another 90 minutes for them of more discussion, because that's where it's at, and it doesn't get any better than this. So do really hard training and constantly be thinking ahead. But I think Floyd kind of nailed it. And don't get complacent. That's the whole combat ready concept. It's easy, like, hey, the RIT crew's only doing 10% of the rescues, but when they need them, you need them. And if you look at the stats, a lot of rescues are even going well past 10 minutes. So just because you're operating in the area doesn't mean that you're going to make this hasty rescue. A lot of times they're going long and certainly complex. So make sure you combat ready.
Yeah, I got to Floyd. I got to check out Lieutenant Ibrahim's session at FDIC when I was out there last year. It was very cool. For those that are interested, it's firefightermaydaysurvey.com. Definitely keep that stuff coming in, because that data that Chief Abbott was working on has really impacted so many decisions, and it's really impacted so much regarding firefighter maydays and mayday management. I know it's impacted it for me personally. And, with the loss of Chief Abbott, we definitely need somebody to kind of carry that mission on, so that we can learn more and do better. And I'm glad to see somebody's kind of picking up that torch. Like you guys both said, there's so much that we talked about here tonight, and there's so much more we could talk about. If you like what we're talking about here tonight on the Mayday stuff, please, shoot me an email, nmartin@combatreadyfire.com, or jump on our social media platforms and just kind of let us know. When we're planning these events, we really do kind of take your input and try and get questions that you guys want answered or things that you guys want talked about. So if you'd like to see some more on this, kind of let us know, and we'll try to get it on the calendar. While we're talking about it, if you're not already a member of the Bay Floor, check us out on thebayfloor.com. It's a private training community that we've created to provide a good place for like-minded firefighters to really get together, talk shop, get away from the noise of social media. And we're able to host events like this on here. So we have both our public podcasts like you're listening to now, and then every other month we also have our private podcast where we're able to go a little bit more in depth and a little bit more personal, and those are hosted on the Bay Floor. We also have quarterly training webinars on various topics. Chief Malta from Frederick County just did a great one last month on fires and garden departments, and we got more stuff coming like that. So check us out on thebayfloor.com. If you're interested in our classes, check out combatreadyfire.com. We're always willing to travel around, bring some seminars, some hands-on training to you guys. But like Chris and Floyd said, I hope that if nothing else, this sparks some good conversation. Whether you like it or hate it, agree with it or disagree with it, it's something you need to go to the firehouse and talk about it with your crew at the kitchen table your next day in the firehouse. So thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you on the next show. Until then, stay combat ready.